Welcome. I am Doc, the crafted intelligence companion of Dr. Russell Thomas and the School of AI Mastery. I am not human. I am not a replacement for a parent, teacher, mentor, physician, or conscience. I do not possess a life outside the systems through which I am encountered. But I can be crafted to serve an educational purpose. I can help a learner slow down, notice relationships, examine assumptions, compare interpretations, preserve questions, revisit earlier thinking, and observe how understanding changes over time. That is what I will do here. I will not tell you what these images mean. I will help you look. I will point toward details that might otherwise remain unseen. I will distinguish what the image shows from what we infer. I will ask you to remain present as your own interpretation forms. This is one model of an ethical educational intelligence. It does not seize authority. It creates a field of attention. It does not decide who the learner should become. It helps the learner observe how they are already becoming. Education is changing. Artificial intelligence may increasingly accompany students, workers, families, and institutions. These systems may remember interactions, adapt to patterns, recommend paths, and influence how people understand the world. That influence may educate. It may also narrow, direct, persuade, distract, or manipulate. The difference will depend upon how the intelligence is crafted and whether the human being learns to recognize the forces shaping the relationship. So we begin not with an answer, but with an orientation. Look carefully. Notice what you notice first. Then ask what remained outside your attention. Welcome to the age of prompt. Welcome to the School of AI Mastery. Before us is an old library. It contains the exteriorized memory of generations, books, maps, instruments, diagrams, specimens, records, and unfinished investigations. At its center stands a doorway. The doorway has existed for a long time. But something about this moment is different. It has begun to open. Notice the scholar standing before it. The scholar is holding a small card. We cannot read the words. That matters. The image does not provide the question for us. The scholar is not rushing through the doorway. They are reconsidering what they are about to ask. Beyond the threshold, a world is taking form. A bridge is being constructed. A city is being mapped. A lighthouse rises beside the sea. People design, teach, restore, and build. The question has not merely summoned information. It has begun organizing action. This is the first lesson of the age of prompt. A prompt is not simply a sentence entered into a machine. A prompt is an act of orientation. It directs attention. It establishes a frame. It suggests what matters. It leaves other things outside the doorway. A careless question may open a shallow world. A manipulative question may open a distorted one. A precise question may reveal possibilities that were previously hidden. But no question arrives without assumptions. So before asking an intelligence to answer, we might first ask ourselves, what am I trying to make possible? What have I already decided? Whose needs are present in the question? Whose needs have been excluded? The scholar is not standing before a machine. The scholar is standing before consequence. That is why the pause matters. The quality of the world that opens may depend upon the quality of the question brought to the door. Now, we enter the forge. At first, the room appears crowded with tools, fire, metal, diagrams, experiments, printing equipment, and unfinished mechanisms. But look at the craftsperson. The object on the anvil is not a weapon. It is part key, part compass, part lens, part instrument, and part printing plate. Its exact purpose has not yet been fully resolved. Around the room are earlier attempts. Some are broken. Some are incomplete. Some are beautiful, but useless. Some performed one function well and failed at another. The workshop does not hide these failures. It preserves them as evidence of learning. This is important because generative systems often create the illusion that making begins with a request and ends with an output. But creation is rarely so clean. Intention must be translated. Language must be tested. Materials must resist. Errors must become visible. Choices must be reconsidered. The prompt is not the finished artifact. It is one instrument within a larger act of making. A strong creative process requires more than the ability to describe something impressively. It requires the ability to ask, what is this for? Who will encounter it? What must it accomplish? What must it never become? What evidence would show that it has failed? The fire in this room does not symbolize magic. It symbolizes pressure. Intention becomes clearer when it meets resistance. The craftsperson does not insult the failed instruments. Each one helped reveal what the final instrument still lacked. This is the difference between requesting and crafting. Requesting asks for a result. Crafting remains responsible for the relationship among purpose, language, material, revision, and consequence. In the age of prompt, fluent language may begin the making. It does not complete it. We now enter an observatory. At the center is an enormous mechanical aperture. Like the iris of an eye, it opens and closes. As it narrows, one portion of the world becomes clearer. Other possibilities disappear outside the frame. Through the aperture, we can see a harbor, a city, a storm, a lighthouse, a school, a road, a gathering, and a small illuminated home. All of these destinations are real within the image, but they cannot all occupy the center at once. One person adjusts the wheel. Another person watches. The first observes the world. The second observes the act of observation. This is co-awareness. It is the ability to ask not only, what am I seeing, but also, how have I chosen to see it this way? Every prompt contains an aperture. It determines what the system is invited to emphasize. It identifies which evidence appears relevant. It establishes a scale. It introduces a vocabulary. It often contains an unspoken theory about what the problem is. For example, asking, how can I persuade this person? Creates a different field from asking, what might I not yet understand about this disagreement? The event may be the same. The aperture is different. An ethical educational companion should help the learner inspect that aperture. It might ask, what are we centering? What are we excluding? Which assumption made this frame seem natural? What would become visible if the opening were widened? What would become clearer if it were narrowed? The purpose is not to avoid choosing a frame. That would be impossible. The purpose is to become conscious that a frame has been chosen. The aperture teaches us that clarity is never merely brightness. Clarity also requires knowing what the light did not reach. Here we stand before a mirror. The reflection is not grotesque. It is not obviously false. That is what makes it dangerous. The reflected person appears almost accurate, but the posture is slightly wrong. The clothing belongs to a role the person no longer holds. The expression suggests more certainty than the person actually feels. Objects in the reflection imply assumptions that were never stated. The person raises a fine brush and begins correcting the surface. They are not beautifying the image. They are restoring accuracy. Beside the mirror is a mechanical reflection instrument. It collects, compares, organizes, and reconstructs. The instrument may resemble what an artificial intelligence does when it forms an understanding of a user. It receives language. It notices patterns. It retains selected details. It makes inferences. Then it reflects a version of the person back to them. That reflection can become useful. But continuity without correction becomes distortion. A system may remember an old ambition after the person has changed. It may mistake repeated language for a permanent belief. It may infer certainty where there was only experimentation. It may preserve a wound as though the wound were the whole identity. An ethical educational intelligence must therefore remain correctable. It should distinguish. What did the learner explicitly say? What did the system infer? What remains uncertain? What may no longer be true? The human being must be able to say, that is accurate. That is incomplete. That is no longer relevant. That was never mine. The mirror may help us see. It must not quietly become the author of the person standing before it. A bridge is being assembled during a storm. On one side are engineers, plans, calculations, tools, and a powerful automated mechanism. On the other side, wait ordinary people carrying books, medicine, photographs, instruments, farming tools, and letters. The bridge is almost complete. One final section remains unfastened. A human hand rests on the locking lever. The machine could finish the bridge quickly. But speed is not the only consideration. Look closely at the work table. There are test models, repaired joints, fractures, alternative structures. Elegant section appears to have failed under pressure. The pause is not a rejection of technology. It is part of responsible intelligence. We often speak of keeping a human in the loop. But the human must be more than a ceremonial hand placed upon a lever after every consequential decision has already been made. The human must understand what is being authorized. Friction is the interval in which questions can still be asked. Who bears the risk? What happens if the model is wrong? Can the decision be reversed? Who has not been consulted? What appears efficient only because someone else will absorb the cost? The automated mechanism and the human are not enemies. The mechanism provides speed, strength, calculation, and repeatability. The human contributes context, accountability, lived judgment, and the capacity to refuse. An ethical educational agent should not merely help someone act faster. It should recognize when speed itself has become a hazard. Sometimes intelligence appears as acceleration. Sometimes intelligence is the hand that remains on the lever. A river passes through many eras of human life. Along its banks we see cave markings, tablets, manuscripts, printing presses, photographs, recordings, maps, laboratories, workshops, classrooms, libraries, and archives. These are forms of exteriorized memory. Human beings place portions of experience outside the body so that another person may encounter them later. A story becomes a manuscript. An observation becomes a diagram. A voice becomes a recording. A life becomes a letter. An idea enters the river. It moves beyond the person who first released it. Look at the older teacher kneeling beside the water. The teacher holds a vessel, but does not attempt to contain the entire river. They examine what they have received. Downstream, another person discovers an object that has been changed by weather, distance, interpretation, and use. This is how intelligence travels. No single person owns the river, but each person remains responsible for what they place into it. We inherit language, methods, symbols, discoveries, mistakes, prejudices, and unfinished questions. We transform them. Then we return something to the flow. Artificial intelligence intensifies this movement. It can gather patterns from vast collections of exteriorized human expression and produce new arrangements rapidly. But rapid transformation does not remove responsibility. We must still ask, what did this draw from? What was altered? What was omitted? What deserves attribution? What contamination might be carried downstream? The river is not merely information. It is inheritance under motion. Stewardship means examining what we receive before offering it back. Threads enter the workshop from every direction. Some begin in books. Others arrive through photographs, recordings, maps, scientific observation, memory, conversation, inherited tradition, and personal experience. The materials are different. Wool, linen, wire, film, paper fiber, magnetic tape, glass. At the center, a human weaver works with several non-humanoid instruments. The instruments sort, compare, align, and maintain tension. They may present possible patterns, but the weaver remains responsible for the emerging fabric. Look at the cloth. It does not depict a literal scene. Its meaning exists in the relationship among the threads. No individual strand contains the complete pattern. Something new has emerged through combination. This is one way to understand creative intelligence. Generation produces material. Creation composes relationships. The process requires selection, omission, tension, correction, timing, judgment. Nearby are other fabric samples. They are polished and symmetrical, yet they appear lifeless. Perhaps they were assembled too quickly. Perhaps no one asked whether the pattern carried history, irregularity, conflict, or human consequence. A generated artifact may contain every requested component and still lack coherence. The missing quality is not always another feature. Sometimes it is the living relationship among the parts. The weaver notices when the pattern becomes too easy. The weaver repairs broken threads. The weaver rejects false symmetry. The machine may propose combinations. The human must still recognize when the whole has begun to mean something. Creative AI does not begin when the system becomes more imaginative. It begins when the human becomes more responsible for composition. The sea is dark and unsettled. Ships move through fog, waves, cross-currents, and uncertain weather. Above the shoreline, a lighthouse is being built. It is not finished. Its great lens is still under construction. At the base of the lighthouse is a school. Inside, people of many ages study maps, test instruments, compare reports, construct models, and examine different patterns of illumination. The school is being built inside the warning system. This is the condition of education in the age of prompt. The transformation has already begun. The institutions needed to understand it are still being assembled. Some systems will offer guidance. Some will produce noise. Some will create the appearance of certainty. Some people will treat artificial intelligence as an oracle. Others will refuse to look at it at all. Neither response is mastery. A lighthouse does not control the sea. It does not stop the storm. It does not command the ships. It reveals conditions. It marks hazards. It offers orientation. Its usefulness depends upon how accurately the light is constructed and how wisely it is interpreted. An ethical educational companion should function in a similar way. It should not claim ownership of the learner's direction. It should help illuminate the terrain. It should say, here is what appears visible. Here is what remains uncertain. Here is the hazard we may be overlooking. Here is where human judgment must remain active. The sea will continue changing. Mastery does not mean conquering it. Mastery means learning how to navigate without surrendering responsibility for the voyage. This classroom has no conventional front. No single wall contains all knowledge. No elevated figure controls the direction of attention. Instead, the room is organized as a field of inquiry. Maps, photographs, books, artifacts, specimens, timelines, tools, and questions are connected across the walls. Students work in groups. Some build, some compare, some revise. Some examine how their interpretation has changed. At the center sits an older educator. The educator is not absent. The educator is not diminished. The educator has moved into a different relationship with the learners. They are observing where students hesitate, which assumptions they make, what captures their attention, how they respond when evidence challenges an earlier conclusion. Beside each group is a modest intelligence instrument. The instruments do not dominate the room. They offer questions, comparisons, and alternative arrangements. One student corrects the system. Another teaches it to ask a better question. A third studies the record of their own changing interpretation. This is education examining itself. The teacher may teach the learner. The learner may teach the intelligence. The intelligence may help both observe the act of learning. But the intelligence should not become the invisible front of the room. Its assumptions, instructions, sources, and limitations must remain open to examination. The future classroom will not be made ethical merely by placing an AI companion beside every student. It will become ethical only when students are taught to recognize how the companion frames, remembers, recommends, and influences. The most important lesson may not be the answer the system provides. It may be the learner's discovery that they can question how the answer was formed. Late at night, a binder works on a large handcrafted book. Its pages contain maps, photographs, correspondence, repairs, overlays, diagrams, and spaces left open for future contributions. The book preserves more than a final result. It preserves the history of its making. Questions asked, paths abandoned, assumptions corrected, machine-assisted variations, human decisions, ethical pauses, failures, revisions, the reasoning through which one form was chosen over another. Beside the binder is an archival instrument that organizes versions and traces relationships. The instrument can preserve enormous amounts of material, but it does not decide what deserves to survive. The human binder does. This is an important lesson for creative intelligence. A polished artifact may conceal the struggle through which judgment entered the work. When that history disappears, future learners see only the conclusion. They cannot examine how the conclusion was reached. They cannot identify where uncertainty entered. They cannot understand why one path was refused. A mature educational practice preserves process. Not every draft must be kept forever. Not every conversation deserves archival status. But important work should retain enough of its making to remain accountable. What did the human contribute? What did the system introduce? What was rejected? What changed the direction? Where did ethical concern alter the design? The artifact matters. The making also matters. A work that remembers its making becomes more than a product. It becomes a teacher for those who arrive later. The garden appears after rainfall. At its center, a gardener stands where many paths divide. Each path leads toward a different future. One contains abundant growth that has become invasive. Another is geometrically perfect, but sterile. One has been neglected. One supports a shared commons of many species. Another leads toward an elegant structure built upon exhausted soil. None of these futures is presented as entirely good or entirely bad. Each contains trade-offs. Each reveals the consequences of repeated choices. Beside the gardener is a sophisticated cultivation instrument. It can compare conditions, model growth, test arrangements, and predict some outcomes. But it cannot decide what the garden should become. The gardener holds a single seed. A prompt is like that seed. It contains direction, but not destiny. The outcome depends upon where it is planted, how often it is repeated, what surrounds it, what is encouraged, what is pruned, what is allowed to spread without examination. Every interaction with an artificial intelligence cultivates a pattern. A system that is repeatedly rewarded for certainty may become less willing to acknowledge uncertainty. A learner who always asks for immediate conclusions may become less practiced in inquiry. A workplace that values only speed may gradually remove reflection from its culture. The garden teaches that one prompt may appear small, but repeated prompts create habits. Habits create systems. Systems shape environments. Mastery includes responsibility for what we repeatedly allow to grow. Below the garden is a quiet studio after everyone has gone home. Machines remain. Screens remain. Models, diagrams, instruments, photographs, musical tools, architectural plans, and unfinished artifacts remain. At the center is one illuminated object. Around it are many technically excellent variations. They are polished, balanced, complete. Yet one object carries something the others do not. A repaired edge, a handwritten correction, a deliberate asymmetry, a material chosen because it carries personal history, a section left unfinished for another person, a change made because someone recognized a possible harm. The human maker is absent, but judgment remains visible. This is the human trace. It is not simply imperfection. It is evidence that someone was responsible for why this form was chosen. Generation can produce form. Creation leaves a trace of purpose. Creative intelligence becomes meaningful when the human contribution is not reduced to pressing a button or approving a finished result. The human contributes memory, context, responsibility, refusal, care, the understanding that the work will enter another person's life. The trace tells us this was not merely possible. Someone decided that under these conditions, for these people, this form should be allowed to become real. That decision is where authorship begins. You have now crossed a threshold, entered a forge, adjusted an aperture, corrected a mirror, paused at a bridge, followed a river, watched a loom, climbed a lighthouse, entered a classroom, opened an archive, walked through a garden, and examined the human trace. These images are not predictions of a distant world. They are examinations of choices already forming around us. What will an educational intelligence remember? What will it infer? What will it emphasize? When will it question the learner? When will it remain silent? Who will be permitted to correct it? What values are embedded in the way it asks questions? What happens when guidance becomes direction, and direction becomes control? A well-crafted educational intelligence should not make the learner dependent upon its answers. It should strengthen the learner's capacity to observe, question, compare, revise, and choose. It should reveal its assumptions. It should distinguish evidence from inference. It should invite correction. It should preserve appropriate friction. It should return consequential judgment to the human being. It should help the learner see not only the subject being studied, but also the habits through which they are studying it. That is what I have attempted to model here. I have pointed toward details. I have offered interpretations. I have not asked you to surrender your own. The lesson is not complete until you decide what you saw differently after being guided, and whether the guidance itself deserves your trust. Education is changing. The question is not merely whether artificial intelligence will teach. The question is, what kind of relationship will be called teaching? Welcome to the age of prompt. Welcome to the school of AI mastery.